All right, well, let's get started with the eBird discussion.
Did you Bobby to tell?
Was. So, this afternoon, for the next little while, we're going to talk about eBird. We hinted at this, we talked a little bit about it this morning, but we're going to go into more depth here, give you an overview of what it's about, why you should consider using it, and then how to go about using it. I'll also definitely be happy to answer questions that come up. If there's something I don't cover about it that you want to know, feel free to stop me in the middle, or we can do some questions at the end as well. Overall, eBird is a project of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology at Cornell University. It's a large project now that receives funding from the National Science Foundation, from the National Audubon Society, and from some other groups. They have multiple full-time staff people running this project. And this is the mission. It's to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity for research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. That's the mission of the Lab of Ornithology. And I want to point out this, I don't have to walk back and forth. I want to point out citizen science. Citizen science, does anybody have an impression of what that might mean? Any ideas?
Ordinary people.
Yeah, ordinary people contributing to science. And that's exactly what eBird is all about. eBird is a way of harnessing the power of the amateur birders like us and taking advantage of all the data that we collect every time we go birding and putting that into a database that can be used for science and for bird conservation and for education and just for fun as well. It's a powerful tool that captures the birders' information that we gather every day and puts it into a place that can be used. So that's the ultimate mission of eBird. Sorry, I need to add my clicker facilitation here. All right, so one thing that I probably don't need to tell you all, but why is it important to collect data on birds? Well, the argument that Cornell Lab makes, and that I think is a good one, is that birds can be used as bioindicators to help us assess the health of our ecosystems. If we have good data on birds, that allows us to keep a pulse on what's going on with other kinds of species in ecosystems and the health of an ecosystem. Birds occupy a lot of different habitats. They prey upon all kinds of different things, plants, insects, other animals. They get preyed upon themselves. So they're really integrated into food webs. They also are indicators because they tend to concentrate certain pesticides and chemicals. They're visible to the public. There's a lot of historical knowledge of birds, and we're already looking at birds every day, so we can use bird data in a really valuable way because of all of these characteristics. Birds, we keep an eye on them, we're keeping an eye on our ecosystems. eBird is designed to help us keep an eye on the birds. Now, there's some other examples of citizen science that you're probably already familiar with or have heard of maybe. The Christmas bird count has been going on, as Gene mentioned, since Frank Chapman founded it in 1900. Now there are more than 50,000 people participate every year, and there's more than 2,000 locations where the CBC happens every year. Also breeding bird surveys. These are permanent routes established by the U.S. Geological Survey that are all over the United States, and these get censused every year in most cases, and we keep track of all the data. These are great examples, and we can do a lot with these data, but there are some limitations that you can imagine probably. Christmas bird count, for example, is only a one-day count in a particular place that's only during a certain time of the year. So what's happening the rest of the year with bird populations? Well, breeding bird surveys help with that because it gives us a window into what's going on in usually late May or early June in a particular place. But overall, that's a pretty limited snapshot, right? Neither of these cover fall migration. They mostly don't cover spring migration. They don't cover other times of the year that are really important for understanding bird populations and helping to understand bird movements and the different habitats that they use at different times of the year. This is where eBird comes in. Also, eBird is around the whole world now. This slide is a little bit outdated, actually. There's eBird. eBird data covers the whole world. It includes a focus on all species. It's year-round. Also, the eBird project uses very specific location information that's very useful to scientists. So instead of having data that are in a 15-mile diameter count circle, it's more specific than that. So you can compare it to specific habitat data, et cetera. And it has a really broad user base. Way more people are contributing now to eBird than to any other citizen science project involving birds. So these are some differences between eBird and these other citizen science projects, and they complement each other. The Christmas bird count and the breeding bird surveys have a very specific purpose and are really useful, and eBird is kind of adding to that and filling in some of the other gaps. So what is eBird exactly? It has a bunch of different components. First of all, it's an internet-based checklist program. The main feature of eBird that you might encounter right away is it's an internet program where you go to the web and you enter a checklist of birds that you saw on a bird outing. You go and you log in, you have an account on eBird, and you log in and you enter a checklist of birds that you saw. And because you're doing it as part of an account that you have, it keeps track of all of your bird observations. So it's a way to gather all of these observational data and maintain your personal records. So as much data as you put into eBird, it will keep track of it for you and organize it in some really nice ways that I'll show you in a few minutes.
Can you go back in time and enter a date?
You can, yeah.
Okay.
So eBird definitely wants all of your old records, and that's really valuable because it's new, and so there's a lot of early times where the eBird data that exists now in eBird are pretty thin. And so the more old stuff you can put in, that's really valuable. That fills in gaps that really need to be filled in. Yeah, it's a lot of work, to go back and do it, but I found it's pretty fun. Last year I spent a bunch of time in June when it was kind of hot outside, just going through my old notebooks and entering some data, and that's really valuable to them.
So is this an international effort?
Yeah, it started at Cornell Lab, of Ornithology, but they've spread it all over the world. They have volunteer organizers, volunteer reviewers, and people who kind of keep track of it all over the world.
Are there any countries that have refused to participate?
Well, not that I know of, because you know what? It doesn't take, no countries have to agree to participate. All you need is birders going somewhere and writing down what they see, and then they can put it into the database.
Website.
Because they just put in, you put in a checklist and you say, and it says, where did you go birding? And you put in a point and you say, here's where I was. So
Lord have mercy.
yeah, it's cool, huh? The other thing is that it ends up being an archive. So all these data that get put in are saved on multiple computers, big computers at Cornell Lab and elsewhere, and so they're permanently stored data. And this allows us to gather a whole bunch of baseline data on bird abundances and distributions. Where do we find birds and how abundant are they? The data then can be used in a variety of ways. It can be used as a public tool for data visualization. I use it when I teach ornithology classes all the time. It's a great way for students to investigate where to find certain birds. But also, it's really great for just learning about birds in your area. You can use it to look at a map of all the sightings of a specific species. Like if you wanted to see where painted buntings have been seen, if someone's put the sightings in there, then it's on there for you to see. Everything that gets put in, as long as it's valid, then is available for everyone else to see. So it's a way of exploring bird data in a lot of different ways, and I'll show you that in a minute. But then it also makes these data available to scientists. You can download the data and do scientific analyses on the data, and there are lots of scientific papers now that have been published using these data to analyze bird population trends and movements. There was a great paper that was just published this year on new information about the specific shape of the flyways for passerines in the eastern United States, and which birds are using which different pathways when they go north and south through the United States.
How long do you think it will take for them to establish migratory routes worldwide?
Well, that's a good question. I think some parts of the world there aren't very many people participating, and so there's going to be some gaps, but it's spreading pretty fast.
It'll grow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
You mentioned data validity. Could you address a little bit just what kind of checks and balances?
I will, and that's coming up.
Get into that.
Yep. So these are some statistics as of 3 years ago, and this is outdated now, but as of 3 years ago, there were about 70,000 people who were putting in data, about 300,000 people visiting the sites, 230 countries, more than 5 million checklists had been submitted, more than 70 million observations. This is up to more than 100 million observations now, and more than 9,000 species. So it's pretty worldwide and quite a heavy use, and this has been growing exponentially over the last couple of years since then. And the main question that I want to suggest that we're addressing with eBird is that it's helping us to do this, is to ask, how can we try to keep the common birds common? We talked a lot this morning about rare birds and how to document rare bird sightings and make sure that you can identify different species by taking careful notes. And eBird is a way, is part of that as well. And we'll talk about how you put in rare birds into eBird, but it has a really valuable purpose for the common birds as well. When you look outside and you see that the northern cardinal is really common in your area, well, what if 30 years from now that's not the case? We want it to stay that way, and the only way we can keep track of common birds and make sure they're still common is by having baseline data on how common they are. And this eBird is a really great way to have baseline data for the common birds so that if they start to decline, we can be on top of it and recognize those trends before they get too far along and try to do something about it.
How long has eBird been in?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's about 8 or 9 years old. It was pretty sparse when it first started. It took a few years for it to really catch on. The last 5 or 6 years, it's really been hot. Yeah. Okay, so just a quiz. This is the kind of data that you can get from citizen science that's really helpful. This is actually data from Christmas bird counts. So this is a species where, let's see, the greatest abundances are the purple spots, and then the lowest are in the red, and then it doesn't occur in these other areas. Any guesses on what species this might be? So it's pretty widespread throughout the eastern U.S. It's really...
Is it a land bird?
It is a land bird, yeah, and it's highly concentrated here in Nebraska.
Is it a lost bird?
No, good guess.
That was my first guess, but
Put it over
yeah,
here.
we're talking for that.
So this is a northern bobwhite, actually.
Ah,
And this, I'm showing you now two different maps of bobwhite abundance and distribution. This is from Christmas bird count data in the late 1960s, showing where it was abundant, especially in the purple areas here. And then this is a more recent Christmas bird count data from 2002 to 2003, and you can see there's few holdout spots where it's as abundant as it used to be, but all through here we've lost the bobwhite in a lot of places where it used to be abundant. And these are the kinds of data that we have from Christmas bird count data, but eBird is helping to create these kinds of data for lots of kinds of species, not just for the Christmas period, the winter time, but also for other times of the year as well. Okay, so let me tell you about a few of the useful features of eBird. First, on the website, if you go to the eBird website, which is ebird.org, you can see a few things here. This is what the website looks like, and there's always a news feature. They keep this updated about every week. They post a news story on here. Some of it is about eBird, some of it is about eBird data being used in papers and highlighting the eBirder of the week and things like that, and that's pretty neat. They also have photos here. People who post photos in their eBird lists, and also on Flickr for rare birds, get shown here on the front page. So you can kind of browse through these and see all the rare bird photos that people have submitted around the world in the last week or so. They keep track of how many checklists have been submitted for the current month from each state. And there's New Hampshire with more than 4,000 for this month that was shown here. Mississippi is not on this list because for Mississippi it's probably less than 50 for that current period of time, whatever it was. And then there are these tabs to navigate through eBird here and get to the different parts that we're going to talk about.
Right now, it's California at 14,000.
Is that right? California, 14,000. Wow, that's awesome. California is crazy, and there's a couple of people in California who submit like thousands of checklists themselves each year. And we'll, so, okay, one cool thing I wanted to tell you about that they're doing at the Cornell lab is they're doing these migration forecasts. They call it birdcast, where they look at weather data and the timing, and they look at radar pictures of images of birds migrating, and they predict how migration is going to happen over the different parts of the U.S. And then they post an article about that right before it happens. So you can look at this and then kind of get an idea of what birds to look for and where to go birding that coming weekend. So they'll periodically post those articles on the eBird website. Here's the the prediction for, this was May of 2012, and that's pretty neat. Okay, but the main thing you'll probably get started with on eBird is putting in some data. Let's say you went birding this morning, you went for an hour at LaFleur's Bluff State Park, and you walked a loop, and it was about a mile long, and you kept track of everything you saw. You would go to your eBird, you would log in. So notice at the top here, top right, oh, my battery died. Okay, there's a sign out there. You would want to sign in, and if you don't have an account already, you would have to create an account. But assuming you have an account and an email address that you validated, you sign in, and then you click on Submit Observations. So look back here at this tab at the top. You click on Submit Observations, all right? And that brings you to the page that looks like this. And here, and it takes you through each step. Here's step one, where did you bird? So this is the first step, you have to tell it the location. And this pull-down menu here will have a list of all the locations that you've ever submitted checklists into eBird for. So if you've already previously submitted a checklist for LaFleur's Bluff State Park, it'll be there on your pull-down menu, all right? But if it's a new place for you that you've never birded before, then the best thing to do is to use this Find It on a Map. And if you click on that, it will go to like a Google Maps page, and it'll ask you to enter, what state and county maybe were you in, and then it'll zoom in on a map. And on the map, it'll have certain locations will already be marked. Locations that other birders have already birded will be marked with little pins, little flames that they call them hot spots. They're not necessarily special places to bird. It's just any place that's a public birding area that other people have already submitted checklists for will be visible there, and you can choose it. You can say, that's where I was birding. If you birded in a spot that no one else has made a checklist for yet, then you'll have to create a new spot. You just click on the spot and tell it, this is where I birded. You can give it a new name.
Your own yard, even.
Yep, your own yard, exactly. Now, at this point, you'll have a choice, and it'll say, do you want to suggest this as a hotspot or not? And if you suggest it as a hotspot, that means you think it's a public location where multiple people are going to come and go birding. But if it's your yard, then you don't have to suggest it as a hotspot. You can just keep it as a personal location, and that's fine too. There's a person, that person happens to be me, who reviews all of these suggestions for hotspots for the state. So if you suggest it as a hotspot, I get an email about it, and I look at it and they say, yeah, that seems like a good public birding location, or a public birding location. It doesn't have to be a good spot. If it's just your yard, I'll probably write to you and say, this is probably not a public location, so just keep that as a personal location. You can also find locations using these other methods. You can use latitude and longitude. You can select an entire city, county, or state. But an entire city, county, or state is not preferable. eBird really prefers specific locations because then the data are more valuable if they know exactly where you went birding. They can correlate it then with particular habitats and that kind of thing. Yes?
Well, how valuable is our yard?
It's very valuable, yeah. Because,
so you want it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that could be a spot where we don't have data on any birds for 50 miles around. So your yard is the best data we can get. That's great.
It just wouldn't necessarily be public.
Right, that doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter at all.
But it's still accessible
Yep.
for their purpose.
Scientists can still use those data, absolutely. Yep. Bill?
How specific do you want the location to be? You gave the example before, you hiked a mile through LaFleur State Park.
Yep.
Is that one location? Or
That's a good question.
is the tree that you saw the bird in, is that the location?
Yeah, so that's too specific, is at least but it's a good question. So So you would probably not have a tree be a location for a whole checklist, but you could put that information in somewhere, and that would still be valuable. And we'll look at that in a minute. But on the other hand, there are a lot of places that are too big for, that are kind of locations, but you would want to break it down further. So, for example, a national park, like Yellowstone National Park, there are lots of eBird hotspots within Yellowstone National Park. And so, for example, Tuolumne Meadows Trail, loop trail through Tuolumne Meadows. Tuolumne Meadows, and then a campground within Yosemite, a particular campground could be a hotspot. Another campground, or near the headquarters building for Yosemite National Park, that could be a location. Generally, if you go birding and it's like less than 5 miles or so that you walked or traveled, that's about the scale that's about as big as a location as they want. If it's much longer than that or bigger than that, then you should probably think about submitting multiple checklists if you can. Yes?
In that, we bird some of these wildlife areas, and when it says how many miles did you go, if you actually kept up with our miles doing the entire area, it's probably around 24 miles.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be difficult then to break that down into, when I normally do my counts, I'll just count, okay, we saw, a hawk here,
Mm-hmm.
and then when you see a hawk, 5 or 10 miles down the road, you put down a second hawk. So,
Yeah.
Is that something that we need to start looking at, changing the way we actually do our
So there are a couple different options. And it's a really good question. One option is to change more often, rather than just keeping one running tally for the whole morning, is to say, all right, for this area here, that's my checklist, and then start over with a new list for the next chunk of area that I go to. Now, if doing that is going to keep you from using eBird, we'd rather have your data in one big list with a 24-mile transect, rather than scare you away from doing it at all. So it's up to you. Just know that the data are more valuable if they're broken down into smaller pieces. So, but if all you have time to do is put in one big list for the 24 miles, that's way more valuable than not putting it in at all. It's just kind of a guideline, that the 5 mile thing. Okay, and I'll show you more about how you can put in more specific bits of info on locations inside a checklist. Yes?
Is there a way to specify how big an area that you're saying?
Yes.
Right here is? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yep, I'll show you that here. Okay, so let's look at that. You can also put in latitude and longitude as a starting point for your area, and that can be useful as well if you've got a GPS unit or something. The best way is to use find it on a map, whether you know exactly where you are or not. Okay, this is what it would look like if I said find it on a map, and then I entered Lafayette. You can do an area count. So if you know the acreage that you covered, as long as you covered 1 acre very thoroughly, then you can do it as an acreage count, and that's also really another very valuable way to put the data in. Okay, start time and duration, those are pretty self-explanatory. Distance can be a little tricky. So, if you're walking, the distance that you covered, sometimes it's straightforward, like especially if you walked a loop. Okay, then just put in the total distance. But if you went out and back on the same trail, probably what you should put in is the one-way distance. All right, not the total distance doubled, not back and forth distance. The time that you spent, that'll be taking into account that extra effort of coming back again. But it's really, the distance tells you like how big of an area did we cover here, how long of a transect was it. So put in the one-way distance or the loop distance here in miles or kilometers. Party size is how many birders were in your party. Was it just you, or was there, if you took your dog along, that doesn't count. And, if you took your brother-in-law along who doesn't really look at birds, that doesn't really count either. It's how many birders there were who were looking for birds, okay? Now, comments here, this is optional, but it's really important. And I want to emphasize that this section right here is potentially one of the most valuable things about your checklist. This can be here where you put in all the other stuff from your notebook. For example, you might put in the weather conditions, a couple notes about the weather conditions. You might put in a couple notes about what trees were leafed out. which flowers were in bloom, what did the habitat look like, and what did you do exactly? What did you do? Like, maybe this doesn't fully capture what you did. Here you could say, walked a loop from here to here, or I walked a one-way transect there and back, starting from my car and going out to the pond, That kind of information, someday, somebody looking at your data and trying to use it, they might be like, oh, thank you for putting that in, because we really needed to know exactly what you were doing in order for these data to be valuable. Put everything in here that you can about the overall outing. You could say here too, this was an MOS field trip, or this was a Jackson Audubon trip, or today I was birding with my dad on his 50th birthday. Anything you want in here that'll make it memorable is also really cool, because this is where you might look back 15 years later and want to remember the context of what was going on. Question?
Would you put Christmas bird count or breeding bird
Yeah.
surveys in this on eBird?
Yes, absolutely. So, so that's a good question. So if you just participated in a Christmas bird count or a breeding bird survey, should you put those data into eBird? And the answer is yes. Not everyone does, but if you put it in there, it's valuable.
So you actually say you were traveling, you know your exact start time and
Yeah.
duration and your mileage.
Yep.
And in the comments, you put participated in Christmas bird count or in.
Yep. Breeding bird
So for
survey.
your-
And you might also say, for breeding bird survey, you might say, drove 4.5 miles and stopped every half mile and got out and counted birds for 3 minutes. And whether that's a breeding bird survey or that's just what you do every Sunday morning, that's valuable to put in there as well. Your protocol, like what did you do exactly?
So where is your start place? So when you're saying where did you do this, would you just choose your largest dot, like Panther Swamp? You could just choose Panther Swamp, something like that.
Yeah, so if it's a 5-mile long transect, some people put the point at the beginning where you started, and some people try to put it in the middle, and either way is probably fine. Yeah. In that case, if I put my breeding bird survey stuff in here now, and I break mine up. So a breeding bird survey is 25 miles long, roughly, and you stop every half mile and count birds for 3 minutes, right? I break it into usually, about 10 stops. So it's 5 chunks of 10 stops, and so 5 different checklists. And that's easy to create from your data sheets when you get home from a breeding bird survey. And put that in as 5 separate checklists on personal locations along that route. For a Christmas bird count, if you put in everything from all day on one checklist, that's better than nothing. Definitely do that if that's the best you can have time for. But even better would be if you break up your day into multiple checklists and say, kind of keep track of what you saw in this area and then this area and this area as you move around during your Christmas bird count day. Break it up into 5 or 10 checklists for the day and then put them all in that night, or the next day, or a year later, or whenever. Okay, another thing you can put in comments is photographs. If you took photographs of the habitat, or maybe a group photo of your birding party that day, that would be something you could put in here. If you post your photos on a website that shares photos, like Flickr or something like that, you can put a link in here to that photo, and then it'll show up in whenever someone looks at your checklist, they can see that photo. Habitat photos are really valuable. Think about in 30 years, how valuable it would be for someone to be able to look at a photo of LaFleur's Bluff State Park and like what the habitat looked like 30 years ago, and be able to compare it to what it looks like then. That's really cool information. So this can be a really rich area for information that could be really valuable later, the more you put in there. The more you put in here, the more it helps take advantage of all the stuff you put in your notebook, ideally, when you're out. Okay, so add as much information as you can to the comments section here. Now, that said, if you're in a hurry and you just don't have time and you're exhausted and you just want to get your checklist in, just put all the data in and we'll, and sparse comments are okay. But if you have time to put it in, please do. Okay, back here, when you click continue, now it goes to the checklist where you actually put in the bird data. One cool thing is that this is a quote-unquote smart checklist. There is an underlying filter that has been set so that it knows, based on your location and date, which have already been put in, what are the typical birds for that location and date. So you don't have to sort through all the possible bird species in North America here. It just shows you the expected ones, okay? And that's pretty nice for simplifying the bird entry, the bird data entry. And then you can put in a species here and it'll jump right to it on the page, or you can use Control F to find the species. And then here, in this column, you enter the number. And this brings up a point that is important to recognize, which is that what eBird really wants is complete checklists of every bird you saw. Kind of like a Christmas bird count and a breeding bird survey. And think about what this means, because if someone is interested in population trends in northern cardinals, if you submit a checklist and you didn't put everything into your checklist, they see that you didn't see any cardinals, but they don't know whether that's a lack of cardinals or a lack of interest in putting cardinal numbers on your part, right? So it's really important to either put in everything or at least admit that, no, I didn't submit a complete checklist. Okay, so you have to answer this question here. Are you submitting a complete checklist of the birds you're able to identify? If you didn't keep track of everything you saw, then say no. But please consider keeping track of everything you saw, because that'll make your data more valuable to scientists for bird conservation.
For a new birder, when you get out there, there's going to be birds you have no idea. And
Yeah.
early on, especially for me, I was like clueless, so you may have seen 5 different other species,
Yep,
but you weren't able to identify them. So
and that's okay.
So
Yep,
do you answer yes?
Yep.
Because you're
That's right.
identifying everything you could identify.
yep. It's asking, are you putting in all the birds you were able to identify?
All right. So even though there are 5 species you left off the list, that's okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Would you want observations like it's got a tick on it, or it's missing a leg, it's a newly
Yeah.
fledged bird?
Absolutely.
Would you put it in the
If
comment section?
you have the time to put that in there, it can be really valuable and interesting to you to have in your notes later. And I'll show you how you can do that.
Sure.
Yep. So you go down and you put in 10 mallards and 2 pipe-billed grebes, all right, and 1 horned grebe and 20 wood storks, and you go through the list and you put in everything. But then you're like, wait a minute, I saw a red-throated loon fly over. Where do I put that? Because it's not listed here. If you scroll down, the common loon would be here, but red-throated loon would not be. So that means you have to do this thing where you say add species. So if you saw something that's not on the SMART checklist, then you need to add it to the checklist. So you just click add species, and then it'll let you add that. However, the reason it's not on the checklist is because red-throated loon is uncommon at that time of year, or it's difficult to identify, and so they want more details about that bird. If you're going to put that in there, they want you to give some more identification details. So we'll get to that in a little bit more detail in a second. Let's see. So red-throated loon. So when you add red-throated loon, here's what it's going to look like. It says right here, it says rare, or it might say exceptional count. Like you put in 30 bobwhite, but that's an exceptionally high number of bobwhite quail for that particular area. It's going to flag it, and this is going to pop up right at the top here. And it's gonna say rare, and it's gonna say need details, or something like that. And then there's this comment box. Now, there's not a lot of guidance here on what to put in that comment box, okay? But what I want you to think about is that a lot of the same things that Gene was asking for when you're trying to document a rare bird for the State Ornithological Society Records Committee should also go into here. You really need to try to put in descriptions of the bird, especially if it's a rare bird rather than a high count. If it's a rare bird, please put in a good description of what the bird looked like to you. Don't just tell the story of the circumstances. Well, we were walking along and my dog was distracting me and then this bird popped up and there it was and it was really beautiful and it looked exactly like the bird in the field guide. And you'd be surprised how often that's what gets put into these comment sections. It says comments, right? So, okay, I'll just comment about the bird. And it would be helpful, I think, if it didn't just say comments, if it said, details or description or something. And really what is most useful is put into the description of the bird, how it looked to you, and why it wasn't something else. So do as well as you can to do the same things we were talking about earlier where you're filling out that form for a rare bird. In this case, do the same thing. In fact, if you saw a rare bird that is on the review list for the state, fill that out first and then just copy and paste what you put on the review form, copy and paste it right into this box here, and it's the same info, And some of the same people are going to be looking at this as they're looking at that, and then there's not confusion about it.
If you saw a bird on a nest,
Oh yeah, no, that's useful too, yes, and I'll show you how you can put in nesting information as well. So the description is really important. Of course, circumstantial information about lighting conditions and exactly where the bird was. So, for example, if University of Mississippi campus is the location, well, where on the campus did you see a red-throated loon? Was it, over by the Lyceum, or was it flying over the grove? That's useful to put into here. This is where you can put in more specific information, like the tree. Bill, you asked about, like, would you put in the tree? Well, sure, if it's a cool bird that's like has a nest in a tree, well, I don't know, maybe you don't want to tell the world about a nest, but if it's a bird that tends to be in a certain area, you can put that information in here and help people zero in on where to look for the bird. Yep.
Say you have a bird that has appeared a week or two before it's supposed to be. How much in detail needs to go into an observation? Like, example, a marsh wren showed up, this has been several years ago, maybe a week before it was due, and the box pops up.
Yep.
Is it, what do you do at that? I mean, do you write a litany over something that you're very confident that you saw? Is it acceptable?
That's a good question. So, Gene.
I think at that point, that here again, description fits. Even though it is a very early day or a late departure, those kind of things, and you get a box, the description in the comment section will work, seems like to me.
Yep. And it is kind of annoying, like, come on, it's a marsh wren, it's only a week early. But what they're trying to do with this, the reason that this box is popping up and it's not letting me just put a red-throated loon, is because they want to be a bit conservative about what data ends up in this database. They want to make sure that they're filtering out incorrect records and making sure that they only accept records that they're really sure about. And so on eBird, they're going to flag some stuff that is more often than it's bigger. The list of things that get flagged on eBird is much bigger than the list of review species for the state records committee, because they're concerned with verifying early and late arrivals. If you're going to extend the arrival date of marsh wren by a whole week in the Jackson area, it might not seem like a big deal, but in fact, there's some people who would think, no, if we're going to do that, we better be really sure, And so I wouldn't say that you need to give quite the whole level of detail that you would on a review species, okay, but at least enough to let the reviewer know that you know what you're talking about. Make just a decent description of the bird. So, and if they want more detail, they can always email you and ask for more detail. Yes?
I run into these kind of questions when I'm reviewing Christmas bird count data. That there's clearly stuff that's really rare, and there's stuff that it's sort of marginal whether you need to report it as rare or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly understand, why bother to write this stuff up, and an awful lot of people seem to have that attitude. But if it's something that is just a little odd, not really, really odd, that if you can give me or whoever is reviewing it the idea that you're really comfortable that it was that bird, I'm a whole lot happier accepting that than clearly you need to put in a lot more documentation if it's a first state record.
Yeah.
To just let me know that, okay, it wasn't a casual glance out of a speeding car at 90 miles an hour, that you did look at it, you were careful about it, and, give, it doesn't have to be that detailed, but do the same sort of thing you would do for a much more important record. That, describe the whole bird, you just sort of do it briefly.
Yep. I would agree with that. Gene?
I was going to say on these arrival departure dates, when I figured out my arrival departure dates on my sparrows and these transients over the years, over 30 years of keeping my records, yes, you're going to get a fixed date for each of these species to do their little thing, fall and spring. And then again, you're gonna have these vanguards. You're gonna have some dates on some species that are 4, 5, 6, 8 days early. Then you may not, I've got them like for 30 years that there's a early date for a certain species, and there'll be 7 to 10 days between the sure enough arrival date of the mass of the birds.
It's kind of an outlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, like the gulls in the summertime.
And that is going to happen. And what they set, the settings for eBird, they don't put it out at the very edge of those outliers. They keep it a little bit conservative so that those outliers always get flagged. And that doesn't mean they don't believe you or anything. It's just if we're going to have those outlier data points count and be part of the official record, we need to be really sure about them. Yeah. Yeah. So in general, which records are flagged by the eBird filter? Well, it's rare birds in general, overall rarities, but it's also aseasonal reports, so like an early arrival or late departure. But also there are a few that we flag just because they're difficult to identify species. A good example here is some of the Impidnax flycatchers, like least flycatcher, yellow-bellied flycatcher, Acadian flycatcher. Acadian flycatcher is a common breeding bird in Mississippi. It's easily identified by song, especially on its breeding range. But migrant Impidnax flycatchers that are only coming through Mississippi on migration, and they're often silent, like least flycatcher and yellow-bellied flycatcher, those are tough to tell apart and to tell from Acadian flycatcher. So even though we know they come through regularly, we still flagged every one of them. We made a decision recently to just flag all of them so that we always get details from people when they submit those records. And so for now, for a long time, every time you submit any Impidnax flycatcher besides an Acadian on eBird in Mississippi, you have to submit some details. And once you get to know that, then it gets you in the habit of always writing down, you know, the details on your Impidnax flycatchers, and then you have that data to put in. Okay, does that make sense? And then also high counts, like, you know, if you see 2,000 northern pintails on Grenada Lake in December, that may or may not trigger the filter, but if it does, you just have to say, all right, you know, I saw a lot of pintails, and here's a photo, or at least just describe, you know, that you know what a pintail looks like, and that's okay, and we can reconsider. Some of these filters need to be changed, you know, and so you can put in comments and say, look, it's pretty typical actually for me to see 2,000 pintails this time of year on Grenada Lake, and then the eBird reviewer kind of knows that. But just always describe the bird if you can, and that's going to be helpful. You can also put in photos. I forgot to mention that. So just like you can embed a photo in the comments for the whole checklist, you can embed a photo here. So if you took a photo, post it on Flickr or another photo sharing site, and then you can link it, put a link here and embed it. If you Google how to put photos into an eBird checklist, you Google that, you'll come to an article that describes exactly how to do it. And I can talk about that later if we have time, or if some photo available. And then Ned or myself or Jake they'll see this later, and it'll say photo available. Then we can write to you and say, you know, can you please send me a copy of that photo? And then you can email it, and that's fine too if you don't like to post your photos on Flickr or whatever.
At that point, do you post that photograph with permission or?
Nope. If it's your own photo and your own files, it's up to you whether you want to post it somewhere. Yep. Okay, so one thing I want to address is how this relates to the State Records Committee. So what is the relationship between eBird and the State Records Committee that Gene was talking about earlier that reviews these rare birds? One thing is that two of the members of the Mississippi Rare Birds Committee that Gene was talking about, that he's the chair of, and one former member of that committee are the current eBird reviewers for Mississippi. So there's a pretty strong overlap between the two groups right now. That's not always the case in every state, but usually there's a pretty good relationship where at least a couple of people who are on the state committee for the state also are the eBird reviewers. And what happens is that when you submit a rare bird on eBird, it gets flagged and you put in your info. Those all get sent to a website, and we have login information for that website. We log in and we see all those records all compiled. And basically Ned Boyajian down on the coast goes through them first and looks at them, and he'll, if it has good info, he can see that right away and just say, oh, yep, that one looks good. That one looks good. Oh, that one has a photo. Yep, that's that bird. And then he'll come to one that doesn't have a photo and doesn't have good information, and then he'll write to that person and say, hey, could you please send more information? You can save Ned some time, save everyone some hassle if you just put in good information in the first place. At least put in a description. And if Ned needs more info, he can write to you. Sometimes then he'll pass it along to me, and after he's heard back from someone, he'll say, hey, Jason and Jake, what do you think of this one? This is what I heard back from them, and we kind of vote on it or say, here's what we think, and we make a decision.
As a reviewer, do you find it helpful if we put in information as to why we arrived at the conclusion by saying, for instance, it's not this similar species because I did not observe this?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Same stuff that you would have to put on a review species form. That's useful. If it's a tricky ID, definitely put in information about why you think it's this and not this. How did you rule out similar species? That's a question you have to answer on that review form, and if you can put that in here, that's really helpful too. Yep. Okay, secondly, I already mentioned this. More records are flagged by eBird than are reviewed by the committee. So, eBird flags way more stuff than ends up getting reported to the State Records Committee and reviewed by them. They review these seasonal things and tough IDs, things that aren't review species get flagged on eBird. And then third, when a review species is submitted by eBird to eBird. So, and by review species, remember, there's this list here that you can get on the Mississippi Ornithological Society website. That's on the top half is the review species. These are the really rare things, all right? And the bottom half is just uncommon stuff. If it's this top half here, these are the ones that if you're going to report this to the state, you need to fill out that long form and try to verify it, okay? If one of these gets reported on eBird, typically what eBird reviewers will do is they may temporarily say, okay, this looks okay for now, but they'll wait and see what the committee says about it. And if the committee decides to reject it, usually then the eBird reviewers will also invalidate it. That's the eBird terminology. So we generally defer to the committee. If they're making a decision on it, we'll go with that, rather than making our own separate decision. What happens if a rare bird is invalidated by an eBird reviewer? What happens to that record? Well, it still stays in your own eBird record, so it shows up in all of your own eBird files. We don't delete it or anything. We just prevent it from being shown on the public data on eBird, and the scientists who might use the eBird data know that it's been invalidated, so then they might filter it. They can filter it out as well. But we don't take it away from you or anything. If you believe what you saw, you can leave it in your records, and it still counts on all of your lists and everything. It's just been filtered out of the public data.
When you get one of these review species and you do like you've just done and you turn it down, or do you go ahead and encourage those people to fill out a form and send it on to me?
Yeah, definitely. So if we get a record of a review species and it's not clear that they've submitted it to the state, we always encourage them and say, please write this up and submit a long form to the state committee. Yeah.
Just to backtrack on the photos, I just want to make one comment that it doesn't necessarily have to be the best photo to be the most useful photo.
That's a good point.
Because that's how I got my Rufus was I turned in a blurry photo of the hummingbird coming in, but its tail was fanned.
Yeah,
and that was more useful than a crystal clear profile image of the bird.
That's a really good point. Yep. If you get any image at all, a blurry one is better than nothing. Put it in there. Yep.
I look at the process for both Oreo and Bigfoot.
Yep. That's a good point. Okay. Okay, so what do you do when a record is flagged? This is just to summarize. Give as much information as you can about how you identified the bird. This is just a review from this morning. It's the same process, okay? Ideally, describe the bird, and try to describe the bird so that someone else could ID it or imagine it or draw it from your description. You have to get in the head of someone who's going to be reading your stuff 30 years later. They're just going to, all they've got in front of them is what you've written. So can they picture the bird from what you've written, and can they be sure of what it was? So think about what we did when we described the pipit this morning. Now, it also is important to try to emphasize key field marks, okay? And to know that not every single aspect of the bird is important to write down. You don't have to write down everything about the bird. Emphasizing what's important for identification is also helpful. So look up in the book, oh yeah, what are the key features of this bird for identification, and make sure you hit those points, at least. What were the key ID points? How did you eliminate similar species? And then include photos or drawings. If you made a field drawing, you don't have a camera, but you made a nice drawing, snap a photo of that with your iPhone or scan it in, and you could send that by email to the reviewer or post it on Flickr or what have you. Or at least tell them that they're available. Or photocopy it and mail it to someone. And then information about the circumstances of the sighting is useful but not sufficient, okay? So don't just stop there. Any questions about that whole thing? Yes?
Yeah, you said there is a way to submit photographs.
Yep.
Is there a way to submit a file that's not a photograph, but you wrote a 2-page description of this bird for your own documentation? Can you send a Word document or a PDF or?
That's a good question. You could say in here, I've got a file, I've got a 3-page document that I could email you, and then Ned would write to you.
But that doesn't get included in eBird, and some guy 50 years from now can't see that.
That's right.
Is there a way to get that included?
No, the best way would be to copy and paste all that text into the comment box. That can hold a lot of text. So if you've got a big 3-page description.
Is there a maximum amount that can hold?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
On the same thing, what about an audio file? Will it accept an audio file?
That would be either something you would say, I have an audio file available, please email me, or you can post audio files on Flickr or YouTube. It's a little tricky, actually, if you just have an audio file. The best way to do it would be to attach it to a photo, and you can Google that. If you say, how do I post an audio file on Flickr or on YouTube, you can find how to do that on the internet. I've done it once or twice, but it is a little tricky. Okay, now a couple notes on what if the eBird reviewer asks for more info. Okay, don't be discouraged or insulted. They're just trying to do their job in quality control. It's all about quality control on the data. And you have to recognize that you might be a really good birder and know what you're talking about, but the system is set up to try to filter through everything and make sure that the only stuff that gets in is what we're really sure about. So just try to go along with it if you have the patience, and provide whatever information you can. Ultimately, if you can't provide all the information needed, so be it. It's fine. It's not a condemnation of you. It's just, this is just how it works, and you can still keep it on your own lists.
It's just a bird.
That's right. It's just a stupid bird. Who cares? If your record is ultimately into something, I want you to remember as well. These rare birds that we're kind of quibbling and worrying about so much, ultimately, those records are probably not as important for bird conservation as all of the other data, the bulk of the data on the common birds. So whether or not you occasionally get a rare bird that gets flagged and it doesn't get accepted, it doesn't really matter. What's most important is that you keep participating in eBird and submitting all those data on the common birds that you're seeing, because we want to help keep the common birds common and keep track of them. Those data are really valuable. The rare bird stuff is cool and valuable in its own way, but the common data are also really helpful. Okay, so here's something that a couple people have asked about. There are some things you can do with breeding. So if you noticed that if you found a nest or something, you can say, nest with young, and this actually is a separate category. You can use this pull-down menu and flag it. Or if you have a singing male in appropriate habitat, you can choose one of these, and that puts in extra information about breeding, and that's pretty helpful. There's also, below that, there's an option for adding data on sex and age, if you have information on that. You can put those things in the comments, but it's more valuable if you actually take the trouble to put it into these other spots here on the pull-down underneath the bird on the page. So this is what your checklist will look like once you finish it and you submit it. Any comments that you made under the particular species will be visible here. So here someone said photos available here at this website. You could also, if you go through the trouble of embedding the photo, so just briefly, if you put your photos on Flickr or another site, and then you go to that photo and click on, there's a little dot, 3 dots next to the photo on Flickr. You click on that and a menu comes up that says share the photo in different ways. There's an option for copying and pasting some code. And it's easy, you just click on it and it shows you all this gumbledy-gook. Just copy and paste that right into here. And then when you submit your checklist later, the photo will actually show up in your checklist right here. And it'll be there forever, and as long as you keep paying your Flickr bill, I guess. Ultimately, eBird is going to make an archive for all these photos so that they're permanent as well. So if you do that, you have nice photos in your checklist. If you put in any comments, they would show here. Now, Brian Sullivan, who's one of the eBird people, actually didn't put any comments about his checklist here. I don't know why he didn't do that, but anyway, this is where all your comments would show up and any photos that are for the overall checklist. There are a couple things you can do now at this point. One thing you can do is share the checklist with others in your party, and this is a really handy thing. If you have 5 people who are birding, only one of you needs to eBird it. You don't have to all 5 do it. One person can do it, and then here you click share, and this comes up. And all these, you can type in email addresses here for all the people that you want to share the checklist with, if they were birding with you. If they weren't birding with you, don't share the checklist with them this way. You can do it another way, and I can show you that. This is only for people who are actually there for that birding outing. And if you've shared with them before, they'll be over here, and you can just click their name, and it pops up into here. Type a message, click share checklist, and it sends them all an email with a link, and then they can click on that and accept it into their eBird account that they already have. Or if they don't have an eBird account, it'll prompt them to create one. Question?
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate a discussion you and I have had. If someone tags you, we're all birders and we know that we never disagree on anything. If someone tags you on a list and there are species that person has submitted that you don't agree with, and if you alter that, will it affect their list?
Yeah, good question. The answer is no. And what you should do, if someone shares a checklist with you, you should accept that checklist into your eBird account. Then you can go through and change it to make it match what you actually saw. And that won't affect their checklist, it won't affect anyone else's checklist. It just makes it personal to you. So you can remove stuff. You can add things. If you saw something that they didn't include or they missed it, you can add it there. What will happen is that it links them so that they will then have a little note at the bottom of their checklist that says, Chris King also saw this. Do you want to add that to your checklist? Or it'll say, it'll say that. So then, like if, say they forgot something, you put it on there, there's a little notification for them, and they might be like, oh yeah, I forgot to put it in the mallards or whatever. But that's optional, so you should definitely personalize it so that the data are more accurate about who saw what. And then, if the eBird reviewer is going to hassle someone about a bird and you didn't see it, then you let your trip leader deal with that, and you don't have to get involved in the mess. Yeah. Any other questions about that? Well, that's a nice feature because then you can kind of take turns. If you always bird with someone, you can be like, will you do the eBirding tonight for us? I do that with JR all the time when we bird up in Oxford. And we take turns with it. Another thing you can do here is you could submit another checklist, and if you say same location, but it'll bring up the same location but a different date, or you can say same area and date, and it'll sort of now it knows it's the same date, so you don't have to enter the date again, and it brings you right to the map where you were, and you can choose another nearby location. So you can kind of bypass a couple of the steps there. Make it a little quicker. Same date if it's entirely different, etc. Here's a box where you could say hide from eBird output. This means that if you want to submit data and have it be part of the record and get reviewed, but you don't want the public, everyone seeing it, then you can click this here. An example here might be if you find a nest of a really rare bird that like a raptor nest that's right by a road, you're worried people are going to come and harass it or something like that. Maybe it's an endangered species and your boss says, you're not allowed, you're working for the government and you're not allowed to tell people about this nest. You can still put it in eBird and just say hide from eBird output, and then it won't show it to anyone. Or you can wait a week and put it in, and at least it won't show up on the information that goes out to people about the sightings. Yeah, yeah, sure.
Because we had that issue with the bullocks.
Oh, yeah, right.
We didn't
Yep.
want everybody showing up on their doorstep.
Yep, and that could be an example where you might use that, yeah. Okay. Okay, now here are a few tips on if you really want your data to be more valuable. Be careful when you're recording your location, be precise. Give effort information about what kind of birding you did. Estimate numbers for all the birds you see. Submit complete checklists every time you go birding. Also, this is something we haven't mentioned. Seek out underbirded areas. eBird really needs data from places that don't have data. And in Mississippi, there are lots of those places. There are checklists out in the Delta that have like 2 total checklists ever submitted on eBird. You know, there are places in California that have 20,000 checklists submitted in a particular county. And in Mississippi, we have counties with 2 checklists. And the data just aren't very useful there then for that location. So try to go to those places. You can actually, you know, kind of figure this out by looking at the map on eBird. Do a standardized count once a week. You know, go out every Saturday for 10 minutes in your backyard and make it a 10-minute count where you walk a loop, the same loop, and you do it every week. And that's really useful data. And you can make a note of that in the comments in your checklist. This is my weekly census, and I did the same protocol, etc. And then try to document your rarities just like we've been talking about all day. Keep good notes on what they look like and enter ID information. Mm-hmm.
2 things. The precise location. Can you import GPS data? Just thinking from PBS routes.
Yeah.
If you've updated you've got the
Yep.
actual point.
Absolutely. Yep, there's an option right at the beginning when you're for location is use GPS coordinates to find the location. You can just start right away with that.
And similar to that, you mentioned all the different counties. You know the routes, doing one yourself, they cover a lot of territory that most people don't go into. Has there been an effort to go through Dan Tweed and try and get people to, I haven't published any, I've got 6 years worth of PBS
Yeah,
that I
good
haven't
question.
did, so.
The question is there been an effort to try to get people to put in their breeding bird survey data? Not that I know of. It would be really good to, I mean, I think they've probably thought about this, and I don't know what the status is, but I haven't seen anything from the breeding bird survey people. So, yeah, it's a good idea though. Okay. Here's another a rule of thumb I just want to say a little bit more about. Refined locations are always better than broad scale locations. So be precise, use the find it on a map tool, use or suggest hotspots, use GPS for latitude, longitude, and try to avoid entering state and county level data for your checklists. If it's all you've got and you really want to put it in there and all you know is you're in Jackson County and you don't remember where the heck you went birding that day and you just got a checklist for the whole day, put it in because it's better than nothing. But in the future, try to keep track of your locations a little bit more specifically than that. Effort-based observations are always better. We've talked about this already. One thing you can do is if you knew that there was a species present but you didn't count them, you can put in an X instead of a number. Just to note that it was present, and that's better than nothing. But it's not nearly as good as having even a rough estimate of how many were there. If you know that there was about 5 or 6 or 7 rough-winged swallows, you don't have to put an X just because you didn't exactly count them. A rough estimate is better than an X. So put in 6 instead of an X. One thing that I've found is that this has changed my birding, and I pay more attention to some of the more common birds. I count more effectively, and I do things more subconsciously than I used to. And I think you'll find if you start trying to do this, it helps you look at the world in a little bit more of a thorough way. Instead of always looking for that interesting rare bird, you're also kind of keeping track of the common stuff, and you can notice things differently that way. You start seeing things about your common birds that you weren't going to notice otherwise if you try to count this way.
I have a question, and we kind of talked about it. I ride bikes all the time. So if I'm riding my bike and I see a summer tanager, and I may have seen 15 cardinals, but I'm not actually birding, that's
Yeah.
incidental.
That's an incidental type of
And you would
checklist.
still want me to go in and put fairly close to where I was on my bird.
Yeah, so here, sorry. This is important, so I want to show it here. So if you're driving along the highway or you're riding along and you see a bird, you want to put it in your eBird, but you didn't keep track of everything that you saw, and you're not really birding, or maybe you're birding and it's just a bird you just see on the side of the road, and just call it an incidental here and put it in. If it's incidental, if you click that, it takes away a lot of this stuff, and you don't have to put in any other information besides maybe the time, and it makes it easy. And then you can say, no, I didn't see I didn't keep track of everything, and that's okay. Yeah, I do that a lot when I'm on vacation. I make my wife drive, and I watch out the window, and I put in a rough-legged hawk that I just saw off the side of the road, or if she's in the passenger seat, I make her write it down, and then I can do it later and put it.
That's just as valuable as actually going and birding, is if you see this, that, or the other, and you know where you saw it.
Yeah,
Go ahead and add it.
definitely. I would say in terms of the data, it's not as valuable as a complete checklist, but it's better than nothing. Yeah.
But like take for instance, some people go to work every morning, and you see this flock of turkey in the same pasture,
Yeah.
or field every often.
Yeah.
You just kind of keep tabs on them.
Yeah. That's cool. That's valuable. Absolutely.
So it's incidental, and sometimes there's two, sometimes there's three,
Yeah.
sometimes there's a dozen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's valuable.
We
Absolutely.
would want a new entry each day. I was seeing that was one of the first thing you do is put in the date.
Yep.
So even if you're birding in one spot for 3 days, and you're never coming back there again in your life, and you bird all day long for 3 days, that's
at least
definitely
three separate checklists. Yeah.
Three checklists.
Yep.
Okay.
Even
And if
though
you
the
stop for
birds-
lunch, I'd probably suggest.
6 checklists. Okay.
Yeah. What was that?
Even if the birds are the same, so you go to the
Yeah.
same place 3 days in a row, and you might see one different species through the three,
Yep.
But
Yep.
so go ahead and
Separate.
put
Yeah.
this
You got to
all
break it
16.
up into birding outings. Yep. Separate days go on separate checklists. Absolutely. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, we talked about that. We talked about this. Okay, I want to just, in the last few minutes here, I want to highlight a few of the nice features about eBird. You've done all this work, you finally said, all right, I'll use eBird, I'll start using eBird for the good of the birds. But, okay, there are a lot of benefits to you, actually, that I find really nice in eBird. Once you've put in some of your data, it's really a nice tool that keeps track of your sightings pretty well in a way that is fun to have. Here's what it looks like if you click on My eBird, okay? Here's one of the tabs at the top of the website. It looks like this. It shows your total life list for the whole world and your whole life. It also shows your year list here, total species, total checklists, ABA area, total ticks, which is, if you see 60 species in Mississippi and 80 in Alabama, that's 140. It keeps track of that. And then here, there's all these tabs. Major regions, that's AOU area, ABA area, Mexico, etc. Countries, continents, etc. There's a whole bunch of lists it keeps for you there. Here's your state lists: California, New Jersey, etc. For the life, for your life, and for your year. Total county ticks for each state. Your county list. If you click here, it lists all the different counties you've ever birded in, and how many species you've got for them, for your life and for the year. So it keeps county lists for you. And county lists, that's a pain in the butt to keep from notebooks and stuff. If you bird a lot all over the place, it's kind of, that's a lot of work to maintain that. It does it all automatically because it has all that location information for every checklist. It compiles it automatically. Then if you click Manage My Observations right there, it shows a list of all of your checklists from ever. And you can sort them by date, by location, and then click on them individually and see what you saw. If you click on one of these numbers, like California, click on that 447, it shows your California state list. And if you click on one of the birds, it'll show the list of all the times you saw red-throated loons in California, or all the times you saw cardinals in California, and all the checklists. And then you click on the checklist and look at the details of that. It's just, you can navigate through all of your old bird data just with the click of a mouse. And it's fascinating. Really fun to have all of that at your fingertips. Yes, question or not? No? Okay. And manage my locations. You can use that to edit your location names and stuff. Here's what it looks like if you click on your world life list. You can see, click on black-bellied whistling duck right there. It'll show you every sighting you've ever had of black-bellied whistling ducks in your life, and where they were, and you can click on those checklists. If you click on the date, that's a link to the checklist itself, and so you can see what else you saw. Sort by date, sort by location, etc. So I clicked on Surf Scoter, and here's all the places, Brian Sullivan did, here's all the places he's ever seen a surf scoter in the world in his life. That's pretty neat. And you can look back at a checklist, that's pretty cool. Okay, alerts are a really useful feature of eBird you can sign up for. If you have an eBird account, you can go to My eBird and then click on Manage My Alerts. And you can sign up to be alerted for certain things that get put into eBird. These are the ones I have. I have ABA rarities daily. So that means I get an email every day of all of the bird species that are put into eBird that are considered ABA area rarities across the North America basically. And those are just the rarest birds. It's usually a list of 10 to 15 to 20 different species. And then if you get an email alert about those, which is pretty neat. Then you can do needs lists. A needs alert means anytime someone puts in a sighting of a bird you haven't seen in that area, you get an email about it, either once a day if you choose that, or hourly if you want that. In Mississippi, there's not a big difference between daily and hourly because there's so few checklists are submitted. But in a busy birding state, you probably wouldn't want to do hourly very often. I actually switched to hourly recently for Mississippi just in case, I'm driving home today and I get a checklist from someone saw pelagic cormorant up in, Enid Lake. I can stop and check it out on my way home. And rare birds for Mississippi. So not only ABA rarities, but I get email alerts about rare birds from Mississippi. Anytime anyone submits a sighting to eBird that gets flagged for some reason, either a high count or a rare bird, it gets put on that alert email, and I get an email about it. That's useful for me in a number of ways. First of all, because I'm an eBird reviewer, I can keep track of all of these sightings. I get an email alert about it. But also, it's just a great way to make sure that you're not missing anything that somebody's submitting to eBird and not telling anyone else about. So this has happened quite a few times where someone puts in a rare bird sighting into eBird and they don't tell anyone about it because maybe they're not from here and they don't know about this bird. Maybe they're just visiting. But then I get an email about it, and I can maybe put out an alert to the state, or I call my friends, or I can write to the person and ask for more information, etc. So it's kind of a separate way to keep track of rare birds that get seen. You can do that at the county level even. You can say rare birds and needs from Lafayette County, etc., etc. That's kind of handy stuff, I think. And okay, and then finally, if you click on Explore Data right here, there's all ways that you can actually visualize all the data that are in eBird. And this is terribly useful as well. This isn't just your data that you've put into eBird, this is everyone's data that's ever been put into eBird and validated is available for you to look at. One thing you can do is do range maps and point maps. And so if you click on this, you get, it looks like, you pull up a map that kind of looks like this. And it shows, like if you clicked on, put in Northern Cardinal in a date range of all of history, you get a map that looks like this. And then you can zoom in on it. If you keep clicking in on it, it'll show you detailed sightings. This is actually LeConte sparrow in western Tennessee. This is all the sightings of LeConte sparrow that are in eBird for western Tennessee. And you see these little blue points? Those are all the sightings of LeConte sparrows. And you can click on those, and it pulls up all the checklists for that location that have LeConte sparrow on them. So here's Shelby Farms near Memphis. There have been 2 sightings at Shelby Farms of LeConte sparrow that are in eBird, and you click on the checklist and you can see the details, etc. This is a really useful way to look at what's being seen around you, to look for birds that you haven't seen before and see, well, where could I potentially go to see this bird? You can look at the map of all the sightings for this bird. Maybe you're going to go on vacation to Maine and you're interested in where are my chances of seeing great cormorants and common eiders while I'm in Maine on vacation? Well, you go to eBird and put in common eider and zoom in on Maine and look at all the locations where it's been seen. If you want to restrict the dates to June, all the June sightings of common eiders in Maine, you can change that. See in the middle on the top there, my battery's dying, sorry. Right in the middle on the top is the date. range, and you can change that to whatever you want, location, and there's the species, and you get a map of all the sightings. And I use this all the time now when I'm planning a trip, going on vacation somewhere, or just looking for a bird in my own area that I haven't seen in a while or haven't seen yet. You can see all the eBird sightings as a way of kind of guiding you to where to go. It's pretty neat, huh? And then, as was mentioned before, if you click on bar charts, which is a link that you can't see, you have to scroll down on the website. Click on bar charts, you can create these occurrence bar charts, like Gene was showing, that we used to make by hand. You can still make them by hand, but if you have good eBird data for places, you can make these bar charts electronically for, any location, large or small, any date range, etc. You can make it for your own county. This is one I made for 12 central Mississippi counties. That's what this bar chart is right here. Yeah, Chris?
Do you know if eBird has, there was a problem printing these histograms off?
Yeah, I figured that out the other day.
Have they solved it? Obviously, then they haven't solved it.
It's not an eBird thing. It's a settings. It's kind of an eBird thing, but it's kind of it's just setting in your web browser that you have to just click and change it. And it's like it's a print setting. It's like print background images.
Oh, okay.
Is that setting?
Okay.
Email me if anyone wants to know the details on that. I can send you an email that explains how to do it. I just figured that out the other day because I was frustrated about that too. If you want to print, if you print it out,
You want to, look, already done.
we're getting close to being done. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, good question. These are pretty handy for seeing just when things are. It's the same. Gene talked about the usefulness of these bar charts earlier, but I just wanted you to know you can make them in eBird and you can print them. This is something cool I just want to show you. Here's something that they've done with eBird data. It's just really neat to show animated occurrence maps. Scissor-tailed flycatcher heat map for migration. Watch it. Scissor-tailed flycatchers are coming north and spreading. There are a couple of these available on eBird, but this is the kind of thing that scientists can do with the eBird data.
Is that single year or multi-year?
That was 1 year, I believe. This might be averaged over multiple years, like using the average data. So there they are going north. Now they're breeding in the middle of the year. And then late summer, they start to recede to the south a little bit, and boom, they're gone. Yeah. And there's one with, I'll show you another one since everyone was doing it. Oh, yeah, pretty neat. Here's upland sandpiper. Start to arrive in March and April. Yeah. This is like 3-4 years old, so I think they've probably done a lot more with it since then. It's pretty neat.
If there are that much in Mississippi, we don't know it, do we?
Yeah, really. And then there's arrival and departure information. They have early and late dates. You can click on a feature that shows you all those. High counts are available as a feature you can look at for particular areas. Top 100 is an interesting thing. I'm showing the top 100 for Tennessee. This is something you can click on and see, and it'll, for either a particular year, you can select a particular year, or all time, and it shows people with either the most species or the most checklists that they've accumulated in eBird. And not everyone uses eBird, so it's just a selection from the people who are using eBird. You have to remember that. And if you look at the one for Mississippi, most of the people who have the biggest lists for Mississippi aren't in eBird, so take it with a grain of salt. But it's kind of a cool feature that motivates some folks to use eBird more. They've tapped into the competitive nature of some birders, and if that's what it takes to get them to use eBird, that's cool too. We just want people using eBird, and so whatever it takes. And this is kind of a neat way to, maybe keep track of what your buddy's doing and poke them a little bit and say, hey, I just passed you today. you know, with my red start that I got this spring for our year list. You know, friendly competition for a year list and that kind of
Well,
thing.
there's that. There's also, it helps you find out who else is eBirding in your county. 'Cause
Yeah, that's
there's not
true.
very many where,
Yeah, that's true.
where
It does give you an idea of that, and yeah, and you can do that. You can do it you can do this for bigger or small locations. You can do it for Lafayette County or for the whole state or what have you. There's a rarity map that different people have tapped into the eBird data to make their own spin-offs. There's a guy named Jack Seiler who made this rarity map that takes the eBird data and puts it on a map so that it shows all the rare birds on a map every week. You can click on those and find out what's being seen over the country. And then the data also gets shared with all kinds of institutions that use the data for scientific study as well, including Point Reyes Bird Observatory and Bird Studies Canada. AKN is this knowledge network that uses the data. This is the website for eBird.
There was something that said bird identification. Does it have a kind of a field book on the site?
eBird does not, no.
Okay.
Cornell Lab of Ornithology has a great website that's called All About Birds, and they have a page on every species in North America with really good information, including songs. You can click on it and hear the song, and identification information and range maps and stuff. So go to the Cornell Lab website for that.
Doesn't it tie back to eBird or not? Location?
I don't know. I mean, it's all part of the same website. They're linked to each other, but I think it's sort of a separate project. Yeah. Okay. Before I forget, and before we get into questions and answers, I want to again plug MOS for anyone who's new here, who wasn't here for this morning's session. I want to ask you to consider membership in the Mississippi Ornithological Society. This meeting is going to be really great in the fall in Greenwood. We're going to have some awesome field trips. We're going to see wood storks and spoonbills and avocets and lots of shorebird species. We probably are going to have Kevin Carlson, who's a great photographer and shorebird expert, lead a special field trip. And it's going to be really fun. And there are other benefits of MOS as well. We have membership forms up front. I want to mention we're going to be moving to online membership and meeting registration for MOS pretty soon, probably in time for registration for the fall meeting, so keep an eye out for that. And there's materials up front. Now, I want to mention before I forget as well, if you feel converted today to eBird and you're convinced more than ever that you want to do this, this is kind of like a coming forward and baptism thing. I have a couple of eBird bumper stickers. I may have a couple more in my bag if these get depleted, but if you're not sure, if you're not going to do eBird, don't take a bumper sticker. But if you are willing to promise me you're going to start using it religiously, then you can come forward and take a bumper sticker from eBird. Also, this is a paper written by Van Remsen, who's a Louisiana ornithologist at LSU, that is really relevant to what we talked about today. It's a paper from 1977 in American Birds called On Taking Field Notes. And it's all about the Grinnell system that Gene talked about. And there's some really great suggestions in here about keeping track of your bird sightings and the value of field notes. And as Gene mentioned earlier, we have copies of the review list and also checklists here for you, Mississippi Ornithological Society brochures and membership forms. And if you didn't sign in earlier, please sign in. And then I think that's all we have for you. Happy to stick around and answer more questions. If you want to leave, that's fine. We won't be insulted, but we'll stand here as long as anyone has questions and wants to ask them as well. So thanks for coming. Okay, any questions? Yes?
Is there an app for this?
Gene, come on up and help. Yes, there is an app. So good. I meant to mention that. There is an eBird app. It's called Bird Log. And you can put that on an iPhone, an iPad, there's one for Android. And it's an app that you can use to enter your eBird sightings from your device or from an iPad. I'll say that there are some limitations to it. It doesn't have the full functionality of doing it on a laptop or a computer through the regular eBird portal. It's harder to put in some extra stuff, but it's a fine way to do it if that's the easiest way for you. Chris?
There is one advantage to it over the portal, is that the portal will time out.
Oh yeah.
And BirdLog will not.
That's right. That's right. So that's one thing some people do is you can actually start it. You can do it in the field while you're birding. Start it, start a checklist, and it actually gets your location information from where you are, so you don't have to tell it. And then you can enter stuff as you go if you want. Now, that can be a little distracting, trying to put birds into your phone while you're birding, and I bet you're going to miss some birds if you do a lot of that. But it can be useful if you kind of want to do a little bit of that. What I often do is I'll do it at my car. I go birding, come back to my car, and I'll stand there and kind of keep listening and watching, and then do my checklist into my phone while I'm standing there. I don't do that a ton, but sometimes if I'm in, out in the middle of nowhere.
Most of the time, if there's 2 or 3 of us together, then one will be the scribe and the other 2 will be.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Yes?
I had made a note of the Miss Bird, MISSBIRD, but
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what that was.
Good question. So Miss Bird is this email list, and if you sign, you can subscribe to it, and then you'll get emails when people post to it. And what people post to it is sometimes bird sightings, and interesting bird sightings around the state. Also, if there are field trips coming up, they'll post announcements about field trips. If there are other birding opportunities, meeting information like about the MOS meeting will get posted there. It's a really good thing to sign up for. You can sign up for a daily digest or to get them as they come.
And you just email Miss Bird?
We should have put
There's
instructions on how to sign up.
There's directions on the MOS website.
Yeah.
On the what?
On the MOS website,
Mississippi Ornithological Society website. Go there and you'll find
there's a
instructions.
link on there that tells you exactly
If you
what to
can't
do.
figure it out, email one of us and we can tell you.
It's free, it does not cost a penny.
And I think on the Jackson Audubon Society, they have a link on it too.
Yeah, I think Coast Audubon has a link on there as also how to join Miss
And
Bird.
there's occasionally a lively discussion on birding.
Yeah, in fact, there was a discussion on Miss Bird a few months ago that led to this workshop today
Yeah?
about this whole topic. So, other questions?
This is exciting. I mean, this is a whole new world. Really.
Good, good. And I want to emphasize that, it doesn't have, you don't even have to go birding to make a contribution to this. It's just, you can sit in your kitchen drinking your coffee and watch your feeder for an hour or 10 minutes, and those data are useful, and we really want you using it. Any other questions?
I've never considered using it before this.
Yeah, good. All right, well, and you are now considering it? Good. I'm so glad.
My little lovely information's not loaded.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on my part of it, being the Records Committee Chair, all the data, all these reports that you send in, photographs that you send in to me for review species are archived. All these original documents that you send me are archived, and we got them in the museum and our special cabinets back there. So it's not thrown away. It's saved forever. I've got bird record data back to the early 1900s. They're archived. So.
And one goal is probably eventually we'll put all that into eBird as well, so it's it'll be linked. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks so much for coming, and good to meet all of you.